You still remember the sound of the screen door slamming behind you as you ran outside after breakfast. Nobody knew where you were. Nobody needed to. You were gone until the streetlights came on, and that was the only rule that mattered. You solved your own problems, made your own fun, fell down, got back up, and never once thought to tell an adult about any of it. And now you're sitting in a meeting where someone is explaining how to give feedback without hurting feelings, and something in you quietly, almost invisibly, wants to roll your eyes. This looks like impatience. It looks like being difficult. But it's not. It's something much more interesting than that. It's the psychology of a generation that was shaped by a world that no longer exists, and a nervous system that still lives there. So what actually happened to you? And why does it still show up, decades later, in the way you love, work, worry, and rest? You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not someone who needs to catch up to the modern world's emotional vocabulary. You are the product of a very specific kind of childhood, one that gave you remarkable gifts and left a few quiet gaps. And your brain has been doing its best with both ever since. The behaviors that sometimes confuse the people around you, or confuse you about yourself, make complete sense when you understand where they came from. Growing up in the 1970s meant growing up largely unsupervised. Not neglected, unsupervised. There's a difference, even if it's a subtle one. Your parents were present in the house, present in your life, but they were not hovering. They had their own lives, their own worries, their own television shows in the other room. You were expected to figure things out. And you did. What that created, psychologically, is something researchers call a high tolerance for ambiguity. You learned early that not everything gets resolved. Not every conflict ends with a conversation. Not every feeling needs to be named and processed. Sometimes you just go to sleep and wake up and it's a new day. And the feeling has moved somewhere quieter inside you. This is where the self-reliance comes from. The part of you that says, "I'll handle it." The part that finds it genuinely hard to ask for help. Not because you're proud, but because asking for help was never really part of the architecture. You built yourself in a world where resources were finite and adults were busy, and so you became someone who conserves, manages, solves, moves on. That was a survival skill, and for a long time it worked beautifully. But here's the part nobody tells you. That same nervous system, the one that learned to be independent, that learned not to need too much, sometimes struggles to receive, to let someone take care of you, to sit with vulnerability without immediately moving toward solution. Not because you don't want connection, but because your brain learned connection as something that happens alongside doing, not instead of it. You showed love by fixing things, by being reliable, by not being a burden, and you understood love when it came to you the same way. This shapes relationships in ways that are easy to misread. A 1970s kid in a relationship with someone younger, someone more emotionally expressive, can seem closed off, cold. But they're not cold. They're running an older operating system, one where love was demonstrated through action, through presence, through quiet loyalty, not through lengthy emotional conversations at the kitchen table. Think about the movies that shaped you. The heroes of the 1970s were self-contained. Clint Eastwood didn't explain his feelings. Characters survived alone. They kept moving. There was something quietly heroic about needing nothing and nobody. You absorbed that. Not as a lesson, but as an atmosphere, as the water you swam in. And this is where it gets interesting, because as you've aged, something has shifted. The same self-reliance that felt like a superpower in your 30s and 40s sometimes feels, in quieter moments, like a wall. Not one you built to keep people out, but one you built to keep yourself upright. And now you're not sure how to dismantle it, even when you want to. Even when part of you wants to be known, fully, by someone. This is the identity shift that happens in midlife and beyond for people from this generation. The behaviors don't disappear, but they start to feel different. The independence that once felt like freedom can start to feel at 3 a.m. like something closer to loneliness. Not because anything has gone wrong, but because the brain is finally in a season where it has space to ask questions it was too busy to ask before. You also carry something that the generations after you were largely protected from. A baseline comfort with discomfort. You didn't have car seats that clicked and beeped to confirm you were safe. You didn't have helicopter parents tracking your location. You got hurt sometimes. Things went wrong sometimes. And nobody made an announcement about it. You just absorbed it and kept going. Psychologically, this created a nervous system that is, in many ways, genuinely resilient. You don't catastrophize the way younger generations sometimes do. When things break, you fix them. When plans fall through, you adapt. This is not a small thing. This is hard-won, deep-in-the-body regulation that came from years of learning that the world doesn't end when things go sideways. But it also means you sometimes minimize. You sometimes push through things that would benefit from being felt. Your threshold for "this is fine" is set unusually high, which means you can miss the earlier, quieter signals that something needs attention, emotionally, physically, relationally. The emotional regulation you learned as a kid was largely somatic. You didn't talk about feelings. You ran them off. You biked them out. You threw a ball against a wall until whatever was inside you settled. Your body was your therapist, and it was a good one. Movement, space, fresh air, time. These are still the things that restore you most reliably, not conversation, not analysis, just the old simple medicine of being in your body, in the world, moving. Think of that as your anchor, your familiar room. The thing your nervous system still knows how to return to even now, even when everything else feels uncertain or loud or too much. You grew up in a decade that valued durability. Things were built to last. People were expected to endure. And you did. You built a life with your hands and your instincts and your willingness to figure it out as you went. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. And maybe that's the most important thing to understand about the psychology of people who grew up in the 1970s. You are not a product of a deficit. You are not someone who missed out on emotional education and is now playing catch-up. You are someone who was built by a particular world for a particular kind of living, and your brain has carried that world inside it ever since. The self-reliance is real. The resilience is real. The quiet, steady love that shows up through action and loyalty, and just being there. That's real too. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to apologize for it. And you don't need to become someone different to be understood. You just need to know that whoever you became out there, between the screen door and the streetlights, that person made sense. That person still does.